9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR podcast. Hello and welcome to a special edition of DSR. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host, and we're here to talk about the developments overnight in the Middle East. And we have a great group to do that. We are joined from Israel, former Israeli diplomat and commentator, and our friend Alon Pinkas. How are you doing, Alon?
Good, thank you, David. All things considered, as is the must caveat.
Well, yes, indeed. But we're glad you're well and with us. We're also joined by Stephen Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations, their reigning Mideast expert, and also our friend. How are you doing this morning, Steve?
I'm doing well. How about you, David?
Very, very good. And of course, we're joined by our friend, colleague, and source of wisdom on all things, Georgetown University Law Center's Rosa Brooks. Go on, Rosa. Say Jikpoa for us.
Jikpoa. D-E-D. It is
We've been talking about Jikpoa for a long time. We've been doing these podcasts for 10, 11 years. And we've been talking about Jikpoa the whole time. So, obviously, the news is Israeli strikes on Iran. And I think the place to start on all of that is your piece in Foreign Policy, Steve. Why don't you talk about what you think the significance of what happened is?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that the Israeli strikes are broader than just about disabling Iran's nuclear program or Iran's ability to retaliate against Israel. I think that the prime minister, going back to the days right after Hamas's attacks on October 7th, said that Israel aimed to change the Middle East. And it has worked diligently over that time, if not elegantly, since that time to change the Middle East. And here we are. The prime minister has talked about the regime and liberating Iranians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the targets, especially the leadership, it is designed to weaken the regime's grip on Iran, just like they did with Hezbollah and decapitating Hezbollah and weakening its grip on Lebanon and being a state within a state. It strikes me that there is more to this than just a disarming strike, but that the Iranian regime is a danger to Israel and danger to the world, and that the Israelis are going to try to do everything possible to make sure it falls through these military strikes.
But
whether it'll be successful, I mean, it's a risky, obviously a risky strategy.
Right. Hamas was, a few thousand people living underground. Hezbollah was a better established organization. But there are 90 million people in Iran, right? I mean, it's a real country that's been around for 5,000 years. And when you decapitate one of its branches of its military, they replace the guy immediately. In other words, it's not going to be quite as simple, right? I mean,
agreed. It's obviously, as I said, and I said in the piece, it's quite risky. But it seems to me that from where Israel sits and a variety of pro-Israel voices, that the problem here is not just Iran's nuclear program; it's that this regime has a nuclear program.
Okay, Alon, obviously the perspective where you are has got to be somewhat different. On the one hand, Netanyahu's been talking about doing this for a long, long time. It seems a bit of a personal obsession. The question is, why now? And does he have the support of the Israeli people?
Okay, so this is a series of questions, but let me just begin by following on what Steve said. How this war evolves, how it develops, depends to a large extent on the Iranians' perceptions of whether or not this is about regime change. If they perceive this, because Steve was talking about loosening or weakening the grip of power, decapitation, and so on, if they perceive this to be a regime changing initiative in which the US is complicit, irrespective of whether or not that is accurate or not, then that could dictate how this war evolves, because it would remove any and every inhibition or and deprive us, all four of us, from any analysis into rational decision making, because their decision making may then border on what we would call irrational, like attacking Saudi Arabian oil terminals, like attacking American ships, like blocking the Straits of Hormuz. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's probably not likely, but if Israel goes on, if this escalates, and they begin to see this as an existential threat to the regime, that will shape how this develops further. Now, as for your question, I'll try and keep it succinct. Look, there are two ways of looking at this. One is to say you got to do what you got to do. Israel had to do what Israel had to do. It follows the general outline, general contours of what Steve said about changing the Middle East. Iran is as close as it ever was to a military nuclear capability. And so Israel felt that this is the time to put a stop to it, or launch what Netanyahu called preemptive. Now, of course, this is conveniently forgetting the fact that Iran is as close as it is to a military grade nuclear capability because of Netanyahu and Trump unilaterally withdrawing from the JCPOA, the original nuclear deal in 2015. Netanyahu
You said it
convincing
wrong. You said it wrong, Alon.
what?
You said it wrong. You said it wrong. Chickpoa.
Somehow I knew that was coming.
That is the most important thing here. Just sorry. Go on.
All right, I defer to you. I mean, this okay. Since Trump is president, mostly you're not normal, and because I come from an abnormal place, I relate to that. Not you personally. I mean, 345 million Americans. Not you with Rosa. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. That it had to be done. Okay. Another is something that David alluded to, and that is Netanyahu's messianic approach to this. He thinks of himself as Churchill, and of the Iranians as Hitler. This is 1938 all over again. This is a recurring theme in his thinking. He thinks he's not only the protector of Israel, but the savior of the West. Now, he's messianic. He's unhinged, because that very image was tarnished almost indelibly on October 7, 2023. So he figured he has only one course, one path to restore that image, or what history will say about him, and that is attack Iran. One last observation. He did not dare do this in 2011, 12, and 13 when he was told that there was a window of opportunity, when Iran's military nuclear program was still relatively weak, and not as entrenched and not as deeply hidden or concealed as it is now. But he does feel, not without justice, that Iran has been weakened in the last year and a half because of the loss of Hezbollah as a prized asset or prized proxy, because of the fall of the Assad regime, because the Russians left, because the Saudis are now much closer to the Americans, but also closer to the Iranians. So he felt that this is an opportune moment. Whether or not he did it with Trump's permission or green light depends who you ask. Because, say, if you ask Trump, he changed his mind about this in the last 24 hours at least 4 times. So here we are. I think, it's important that we have this conversation now, David, but honestly, it is way, way too soon to draw, broad brush conclusions from anything.
Yeah, no question about that, because we don't know how long it's going to go on, what it's going to do, what it's going to be, and so forth. But Rosa, one of the things swirling around this, rather confusingly, is, what was the U.S. role in all of this? On the one hand, Marco Rubio said last night in our first initial statement, we had nothing to do with this. Hands off, leave us alone, leave us out of this. Then, Trump started posting things and he was like, well, I warned the Iranians all along and they should have done a deal with us and maybe they should do a deal now. And then the Israelis are like, well, actually, this was all coordinated and green lighted by the White House, and it was all part of a deliberate deception that we've been working on for 8 months. And that first appeared in Axios, and now the Wall Street Journal has a big story. This was all a plan. This was all four-dimensional Trumpian chess. So I was just wondering, Rosa, what do you think?
Well, I'm not an expert in this region, David. You know that my primary function here is to be the language police.
Yeah.
But first of all, Trump does not play four-dimensional chess. He does not play two-dimensional checkers. He's not that great at tic-tac-toe. So I certainly don't think this is some kind of Machiavellian Trumpian manipulation. That being said, as others have suggested already, it's, of course, the U.S. was at a bare minimum aware of this and willing to tolerate it. I mean, we pulled our we pulled out non-essential embassy staff in places in the region, several days ago. We've been turning, we've been doing the things that you do when you know that there is about to be a giant military strike, which could trigger an escalatory crisis, which could endanger our people. And we didn't do that just because we happened to have a hunch. We did that because we were talking to the Israelis and we knew perfectly well, what level of detail we coordinated with them on. I don't know. It'll be long time probably before we do know, what in between, what a great idea, we're all for it versus, well, we have a few qualms, but whatever. We said, I don't know that either. But clearly, I mean, the Israelis were not going to do this if they thought it would provoke a really sharp negative response from the United States. And Trump changing his mind 4 times in 24 hours is totally par for the course. If it works, he'll take credit. If it's a disaster, he will be soon saying, "Oh, I warned the Israelis not to do something this stupid." And I think it's at this point it's anyone's guess what happens. I do think that the common element, and Alon has already talked about this. What do Trump and Netanyahu have in common? They are elected officials who act like monarchs, and they are elected officials who are prone to attempting to distract people from one horror that is controversial and unpopular by launching immediately into another, because that keeps everybody on their toes and makes it hard for resistance to remain focused. Because you say, oh, look, now we have a new crisis. Everybody's got to rally around. Oh, look, now there's another one. Oh, look, now there's another one. And clearly that domestic political calculus is part of it. For Netanyahu, just as for Donald Trump, the sort of endless, I hesitate to say parade, given the parade coming tomorrow, but the endless parade of sort of new executive power grabs and horrors is also part of the same theme. And it's very sad to see these two democracies devolve into aggressive monarchical states.
Yeah, probably not a great time though for Trump to be playing toy soldier here in Washington or in Los Angeles, is it?
You might think that this would be a good moment to have our military focused on external threats. You might think that, yes.
Yeah, right. Particularly as Steve, one of things Trump's doing here as he gradually comes to the conclusion over a series of tweets that he should own this, which has now got him with the press this morning gloating about it. Like, see my four-dimensional chess here. That he might realize that this all of a sudden puts all U.S. troops in the region at risk. But by owning it, he undoes everything that Rubio tried to do last night.
Except for those rolling through Bethesda, Maryland. Yes, I think it's been extraordinary how much, and I mentioned this to you before, David, how much BS there is out there on this. And
I just want you to know, I just published a piece at the Daily Beast, and I quote you, saying there's a lot of BS out there.
And people who know me will say that's absolutely, totally in character for me to say something like that.
Line and statement to keep making.
That the president has kind of leaned into this operation, as the early reports coming out of Tehran is that the Israelis were pretty successful in what they tried to do. But of course, as Rosa points out, the guy isn't even really that good at tic-tac-toe and can't see that the more and more he takes credit for this, the more and more as this goes on and the Iranians kind of gather themselves and are able to, if they can, muster themselves, that this puts American forces that remain in the region directly in their crosshairs, the more and more he crows about this. And this is the real problem with how the administration has handled this. I have no doubt that the U.S. military will be able to repel attacks, but it does put American forces in harm's way. Trump, I mean, he came into office, he made it clear he wanted a deal. And this was a significant difference with the Israelis. And the Israelis said, these Iranians have crossed the threshold. And I think, again, to what Rosa and Alon was saying, is that Trump remains committed to a deal. But when the Israelis started going, because of the institutional links between Israel and the United States at that defense and security level, of course, the United States was going to help enable this with real-time intelligence. And then, of course, in defense of Israel in the so far Iranian muted response, this was a CENTCOM operation that involved regional partners. But there's too much dunking out there. There's too much, again, BS. If you go on social media, it's over, it's done, whatever. There's still Iranian nuclear scientists out there. And David, as you pointed out, regime change is not so easy. And the Iranians could very well replace lost commanders with others who can do a lot of damage, both to the United States as well as Israel and regional.
And by the way, and reportedly they have already. According to some of the reports that were out there. Alon, one of the reports out there is that the reason the Israelis had to do this now is that they discovered there was another facility that was being built that was even deeper, even less penetrable, even to deeply penetrating, munitions. And if they didn't act now, they couldn't get to it. However, there are other people out there who are saying things like they probably couldn't get to some of this deep stuff anyway, and that a lot of what they were trying to get to at Natanz which is one of the nuclear enrichment facilities, was probably beyond their reach, and they didn't go to the other big nuclear enrichment facility. So, what's your take on the sort of strategic value of all of this?
Look, Israel doesn't have the munition, the so-called bunker buster. We're talking about 30,000-pound bombs. It's called GBU 57, GBU 58. There's a GBU 27 that Israel does have, but it does not penetrate a 3 or 4 story building high cave dug inside a mountain. For that, you need the U.S. And there's a reason why successive administrations have been wary that Netanyahu, including the Trump administration, by the way, remember how Mike Wolfs, the national security advisor, was fired, basically, for running a covert back channel with Netanyahu, not because of the Signal Group, but that's beside the point. There has been an anxiety or suspicion in the U.S. that Netanyahu is trying to manipulate them and drag them into a war. And I think that Trump is happy to a degree, as Steve said, as long as it's successful and he could claim credit for it. And as Rosa said before, that once it goes sour, he could say, I warned the Israelis. At this point, he's happy because he wasn't dragged into this. But going back to what Steve said, if the Iranians perceive the Americans to have been collaborating or complicit in this, it may change the entire landscape of this war, which because Israel did not take out the entire nuclear infrastructure, the U.S. is now probably positioned where it could end the war. Now, we're talking Trump here. He also ended the war in Gaza. He didn't. He also ended the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He did not. And he can also end the war in Iran. I'm not sure he can, because in order to do that, he needs to entice the Iranians with some kind of a deal that's probably better than the one that they saw 2 weeks ago. And at least in terms of not of enrichment, but in terms of the sanctions relief. I don't know if he has it in him to do that.
Yeah, no, I don't know that he has it in him to do that.
I
He's
think they're misunderstanding the Trumpian approach to ending wars, which is directly analogous to the 2-year-old's approach to hiding from you. You know, the 2-year-old closes their eyes and they think, well, I can't see you, so you can't see me, so I'm invisible. That's basically the Trump approach to ending wars. We've closed our eyes now. We don't see Gaza and Ukraine anymore, and therefore they don't exist. And that's how we could end this war too. Any moment we choose.
well, I think that's true. But Rosa, here's the other thing that I think is true. First of all, Steve is a respectable academic, and Alon is a respectable diplomat. You're a respectable academic, so I can go out and speculate because I'm not respectable anything. And I will tell you that I believe Trump may have said to the Israelis, "Okay, go ahead, do your thing, but don't do anything without talking to us, because we're going to go and try and get this deal done." And he thought he would get a deal done. And he thought the Israelis would listen to him. And my guess is that they didn't. My guess is that they went ahead and did it, and that now he's backfilling, right? But
Yeah.
to pick up on Alon's point, no deal in Ukraine, no deal in Gaza, no deal in Iran, no 90 deals in 90 days. In fact, no real deals at all in 90 days. And this guy who's the art of the deal guy, he's shrinking before our eyes on the international stage. He said a lot of stuff about Biden, but the conclusion I draw is that Trump is impotent right now. He's appearing more impotent to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Oh, sure, and the rest of the world sees that his strategies are those of a toddler. There's attention span is that of a toddler. That he is much more interested in spectacle domestically than he is in doing anything internationally that will have any real effect, and that he is a big chicken. And the rest of the world is happily taking advantage of this, because, or unhappily, as the case may be, right? I mean, our allies are going, oh shit, we used to have a dependable, important, strong ally in the United States, and now we don't anymore. Our adversaries are saying, ooh, what an awesome opportunity for us to basically do whatever we want, because we know that Trump doesn't care. I mean, if I were, I'm sure all the rest of you also talk to friends in the military, and it's just an agonizing moment for military personnel who simultaneously see our international influence shrinking, our troops being placed in danger by reckless policy decisions or inaction by the president, and our military resources being diverted to supposedly solving fake problems at home in ways that run really counter to sort of deep U.S. traditions and military traditions, to the detriment of morale and readiness. I mean, the whole thing is just totally disastrous. But we know Trump is not a guy who ever acknowledges defeat. He will just once again say, that thing that you're talking about that would make me look bad, that just doesn't exist. And besides, you're a loser. And besides, look over there, I've performed a new magic trick.
When you say our influence is shrinking, I can't help but think of Trump in the role of George in Seinfeld saying, but the water was very cold. And if you don't get the reference, you could.
No, you're talking about shrinkage and
shrinkage.
We have.
Yeah, you don't need to draw a picture, Alon.
I'm not drawing a picture. I'm just saying that the issue was raised in the court of law by one Stormy Daniels. So
yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ!
And you asked for it.
Okay. From Tiny Mushroom to Mushroom Cloud, the latest episode of Deep State Radio. No, that's not where we're going with this.
On that note, I have to go, David.
As a semi-respectable academic.
Yeah, well, as a less respectable academic. Rosa, are you leaving? Oh, you have a hard out. Okay.
I do.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. It's been great to talk to
Bye,
you.
Rosa.
Bye,
Always.
Rosa.
Bye. All right, but picking up on that, one can't ignore that all of this is happening while the U.S. is going to shit. I mean, in like this is a Middle East crisis unlike any other,
And there's no National Security Council.
and no national security advisor to speak of, right? And there's no I mean, Trump today we're recording this on Friday morning, has apparently at 11 a.m. because he really had to get up early. Steve, you and I were up at 5, right? Trump's got the 11 a.m. schedule on the National Security
Well, he had to
Council.
watch Fox and Friends, and then he had to watch this, and then he had to watch that, and spend a little time on Truth Social.
Right, but now he's got an 11 a.m. National Security Council meeting, except he doesn't do briefings. He doesn't talk to people. He doesn't do anything. It's just to say he's having the meeting. Right. And then he'll come out or say something afterwards, like this is going exactly like I planned. But America's weaker right now. What's going on in LA makes us weaker, and I'm just wondering how you factor this in.
Well, I certainly think, first, let me just say that I think you were spot on. I mean, my sense is that the Israelis basically ignored the United States. So was it a green light? Was it a red light? It was kind of probably yellow. But they went ahead and did this because they perceived what they perceived. And I leave to Alon's expertise to kind of be able to flesh that out more, what it is that the Israelis were actually perceiving. But absolutely, my messaging apps, when, diplomats from the region, officials from the region contact me, it's often about the shenanigans that are going on in the United States. And it's often to express disbelief. I mean, I recently had a conversation with a prominent Saudi who was worried about the deterioration of democracy in the United States. Now, let's think about that. Saudi Arabia, not a democracy, yet the Saudis themselves concerned about the political instability resulting from our illiberal turn here. So it does have an impact on the way our partners see us, how our adversaries see us. And I think that anybody who is looking at this in an objective way understands that Trump is clearly backfilling and that he was not part of this. So I think that there may very well be an impact on America's standing, which has already taken a hit as a result of the Trump presidency.
We have a limited amount of time here, and we could go on and on about this, but Alon, clearly the potential consequences for people living in Israel could be enormous. The last time there was a kind of an exchange here, it was not over in what you earlier characterized as an existential issue, and the Iranians sort of telegraphed it, and the Israelis were able to intercept it. And there are some reports this morning of some intercepted Iranian drones already, but what's the mood? How do you feel? How do Israelis feel right now? Particularly since the Israeli government is saying this is going to be a long-term thing. We're going to be doing this for weeks, not days.
All right. I'll start with what you expect the caveat or the disclaimer to be. It's too soon to tell you what the people think because the people haven't suffered the consequences of what Israel is doing. So there may be this euphoric / orgasmic, look what we did, but that could evaporate within 24 or 48 hours.
By the way, Alon, I got that this morning. Well, this morning your time, last night, DC time, from 3 Israeli friends who video messaged me from a bunker. And they were kind of punch drunk and like, it's all over. We did, there was a certain amount of euphoria that was going on.
There's the one constant in Jewish history is being wrong for 2,000 years. And history proves that. It's not me saying, it's not me talking, it's history. The second thing,
I'm going to use that.
Well, when you speak in South Florida, it's all.
It's not going to play well in South Florida.
I know. But going back to because you raised a major issue here, David. How Israelis feel. Israelis, even those on the center left, even those in the political opposition, even those in the Knesset in the last 20 years, have been brainwashed on Iran. Now, I'm not saying that Iran is Sweden, and I'm not saying that Iran is a model state. They are vile. They are dangerous. The combination, this lethal combination, lethal cocktail of the mullah radical end of times regime and weapons of mass destruction is a danger. That's not even debatable. But Israelis have been brainwashed, particularly by Mr. Netanyahu and his messianic thing, that this is 1938, and extinction is behind the is around the corner, and annihilation is imminent, and we have to take care of this. And Iran, again, not that they are nice people necessarily, but in terms of the regime, was portrayed as some kind of a major threat. So much so that Netanyahu confiscated the entire, for lack of a better word, hijacked the entire political debate in Israel, because Israel's most pressing fundamental problem is the Palestinians, not Iran. Demographically, politically, any way you look at it. So he can go on and brag all he wants about how many people he killed in Tehran, and the accuracy of the Mossad agent and the drone missile and the F-35 or F-15 rather sortie. Fine. He did not solve anything. He is stuck 20 months in Gaza without decisively ending Hamas, even though he pledged to eradicate and obliterate and annihilate and what have you. So I think it's going to take a few days of this, ecstatic happiness. Oh, we showed them. Oh, because look, there's one other aspect in terms of, the national psyche here, or the Israeli psyche. Israelis were devastated on October 7th. They were not just shell shocked and agonizing in pain over those who were murdered. They were devastated in terms of national security. They were devastated by how the military performed, by how the intelligence performed, by how the political echelon performed. This supposedly, gives them back a mojo of sorts. But again, I qualify this, as we all three of us have done several times in the last hour. It all depends on the next few days. If Iran launches 200 missiles, of which 120 will be shot down, and the 80 will penetrate, and of the 80, 40 will hit targets, and of the 40, 10 will hit so-called quality targets, you can have 300 or 400 or 500 dead. I'm sorry to sound like a statistician about this, but this is the ballistic statistics ratio here. And then ask me then about the Israeli mood, and I will probably give you a different answer.
Yeah. Well, let me, Steve, I apologize, because one of the things we do in, podcasts like this, even when we try to be in depth, is I inevitably turn to somebody like you and say, well, we only have a couple minutes left. Let me ask you a question that'll take a week to answer. But
it's not my first rodeo.
Well, the question is, sort of what's the regional report? Like, you're Saudi, you're Emirati, you're Syrian, you're Lebanese, you're Hezbollah. How's everybody reacting to this, or is it all just wait and see?
Well, I did hear from folks in the Gulf whose basic view was this was a terrorist regime. This is a terrorist regime.
Which one? I just want to be clear. The Iranians or the Israelis?
The Iranians.
Oh,
terrorist. Yeah. Thanks for asking me to clarify.
I just wanted to clarify.
This is maybe this is a function of the people I know, but this is a terrorist regime. This was bound to happen. Everybody's going to publicly condemn the Israelis for this, but privately, people are going to say this is what had to happen, and admire the Israelis' technical proficiency, and hope we don't get hit in the retaliation. I will say that I think that one of the reasons why the Israelis officials are saying this is going to be days and days and days is to forestall the scenario that Alon just pointed out, which is that, you have to prevent, and that's what the point of this initial wave of strikes was to prevent the Iranians, deny them the ability to retaliate with hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles. But you have to be perfect in order for that to happen. And we don't know in the early going whether the Israelis got all 100 Iranian missile launchers. And you can't, of course, count on anything that anybody is saying in the first hours after these waves of strikes. But I think in the Gulf, officials, are kind of skittish, quietly hoping they're not going to get the blowback here, and quietly admiring what the Israelis have done while issuing, I think, blistering statements about the Israelis.
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me. Of course, one group of people who are guaranteed to suffer from this are the residents of Gaza.
Of course.
Yeah.
Who will be between getting squeezed because Hamas is close to Iran and being ignored by the world because this other crisis is distracting attention.
There is one other actor in this. I mean, we're not going to we don't have time to develop this. I only mention this not just because of the importance, because it's something I know you're interested in, David, and that is China. China has been Iran's greatest ally in the last few years. So has Russia since the Ukraine war, but particularly China in terms of circumventing the sanctions, buying Iranian oil, and so on and so forth, and using the Iranians as a springboard for the newer versions of the Road and Belt initiatives. Given the context of this war in the greater context of the China-U.S. trade war, it would be interesting to see if the Chinese look the other way and be concerned with North Korea all of the time, or will they be more active, even rhetorically, on Iran in the next few weeks? Because that's an opportunity for them, either to work together with Trump and say to him, let's do this together, or confront him. Either or.
That's a good point.
I think it's an excellent point, but I also think that if you look at everything Trump has done since he took office, even though he loves in his heart Vladimir Putin and Vladimir has been mean to him, everything he has done has helped China. Everything, not intentionally, but it's just been the inadvertent.
He's that kind of a guy. This is what you're missing. This is the great guy that you're missing in Donald.
Yeah, no, he is. And by the way, in China, when I talk to people in China, they love it. They're literally laughing at every single development because people
that I know in places like France, Germany, and Britain, even Canada, but think that Xi Jinping, not exactly a Thomas Jefferson, a beacon of the liberal democratic thought, that Xi Jinping is a much more serious, much more stable, and much more dependable ally than Mr. Trump is. That tells you something.
I remember when my former boss, the former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, his exit interview with the New York Times, where he said, what worries him going forward is that the United States is actually a source of instability in the world because of Donald Trump. And so it would make sense that people would look at Xi Jinping, as you said, not a good guy, not a Jefferson, but as a source of stability and competence.
You're talking about Richard,
as opposed
right?
to what we have in Washington.
You're talking about Richard.
Richard said that.
Yeah.
Did I not mention his name?
No.
That's my former.
I'm sorry, Richard Haas, the former president of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah. Well, the Chinese want to advance within a stable international system. It makes them different from the Russians. The Russians know they can't advance in a stable international system, so they want to disrupt the system. But I do think, by the way, in all of this, there is an interesting X factor, which is Iran is really important to Russia. Iran has been helping Russia and Ukraine. Right. They're very close, and Russia can't be super happy about all this.
No, you're absolutely right. And given that Trump is now saying that, at least the analysis is that he gave in to the Chinese on the tariffs, I don't know how that's going to play in his mind. I mean, if the Chinese stand up behind the Iranians, it's going to immediately affect the way he thinks about this or talks. Not that I take anything he says seriously, even if he means it, even if he's genuine, because the next day he's going to say the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And there's no real policy making. There's no real policy thinking process. There's nothing.
Well, look, I could go on and talk to you guys forever, and hopefully I'll be able to continue to do that offline and through this, and then you'll come back here because there's clearly much to discuss. Very grateful to you for coming on with such short notice. Also grateful to Rosa. And for all of you who are listening, we are grateful for your joining. And if you like what you heard, go to the DSRnetwork.com, click on membership, and help support us and what we do. Until the next time, I'm David Rothkopf. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.